The night was colder than usual, and the wind carried the sound of music and laughter from the small saloon at the edge of town. Inside, men sat around wooden tables, their hats tilted low, eyes fixed on cards and coins. Among them was David Malone, a quiet man with a tired face and calloused hands. He didn't talk much, didn't smile much either. He had been drifting from town to town, doing odd jobs to survive, but luck hadn't been kind to him lately. The little money he had was almost gone. He knew he shouldn't sit at that poker table, but sometimes a man with nothing left takes the only chance he sees. He joined the game with steady hands, hiding the nervous thump in his chest. The cards were worn, the whiskey strong, and the air thick with tobacco smoke. Across from him sat Hank Carver, a broad-shouldered ranch owner who seemed to enjoy watching others lose. Hank laughed loud, slapped backs, and raised bets like money meant nothing. Everyone in town knew him. Some respected him. Most feared him. When Hank saw David take a seat, he gave him a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You sure you can afford to play, stranger?" he asked. David just nodded and said, "Let's find out." The first few hands went badly for David. He lost small but steady. Hank was good. Too good. And the others folded one by one until it was just the two of them left at the table. The crowd gathered, sensing something worth watching. David took a slow breath. He had one last handful of chips. It was all or nothing. The dealer shuffled. The cards slid across the table, and the final game began. As the cards turned, David's luck shifted like the wind. His heart started to race as he saw the pattern forming in his hand. A strong one. Hank raised the bet again, throwing in gold coins and a bottle of fine whiskey. The room buzzed. David matched the bet without a word. Then Hank leaned back, his face half hidden in smoke, and said something no one expected. "I'll sweeten the pot, my ranch. The whole Carver ranch, deed and all." The crowd gasped. It was madness, but Hank was half drunk and proud. He wanted to humiliate the stranger. David stared at him for a long moment. "That's a big bet," he said quietly. Hank smirked. "If you think you've got the guts, call it." David hesitated, then slowly pushed his last chips forward. "I call." The dealer flipped the cards one by one. Gasps filled the room. Hank's grin faded as his cards fell short. David's hand, steady and sure, beat him clean. For a second, no one moved. Then Hank slammed his fist on the table, sending chips flying. "You got lucky," he growled, his face red with anger. But a bet was a bet, and everyone in the saloon had seen it. Hank had lost fair and square. With shaking hands, he pulled a folded paper from his coat, the deed to the ranch, and tossed it toward David. "Take it," he spat. "Let's see how long you last there." Then he stormed out into the night, leaving behind only the sound of the door banging in the wind. David sat still, the deed resting on the table like something unreal. A ranch, his own land. He'd spent years sleeping in barns and wagons, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. Now out of nowhere he had something men spent lifetimes trying to build. But he didn't smile. He knew luck could turn cruel just as fast as it turned kind. Still that night, as he folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, a small flicker of hope stirred in his chest. The next morning, the sun rose over the dry hills, painting the land gold. David borrowed a horse from the stable and rode out to see what he'd won. The road stretched long, lined with fences that had seen better days. After an hour's ride, he saw it, the Carver Ranch. The house stood tall but worn, with a barn beside it and a few cattle grazing in the field. Smoke curled from the chimney. He thought that was strange. He didn't expect anyone to be there. Dismounting his horse, he walked to the front porch and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. The door suddenly opened, and a young woman stood there, pointing a shotgun straight at his chest. Her face was pale from anger, not fear. Her eyes were sharp and her voice steady. "Turn around," she said. "You've got no business here." David froze, holding his hands up slowly. "Easy now," he said calmly. "I'm not here for trouble. Name's David Malone." "Your father." "I know who you are," she cut in sharply. "You're the man who took this ranch from my father in a card game." Her tone carried both hatred and pain. "He might have been foolish, but that doesn't give you the right to walk in here like you own the place." David looked around at the broken fence, the dusty windows, the land stretching wide and empty. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I didn't come to take anything. I just came to see what I've gotten myself into." She didn't lower the gun. "You got yourself into trouble," she said coldly. "Now get off my land." Then she shut the door hard enough to rattle the windows. David stepped back, looking at the closed door, then at the fields around him. He could have turned and left right then. Any other man would have. But he didn't. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was something else. Something in the way her voice trembled when she said her father's name. He decided to stay in the old bunkhouse near the barn. He didn't ask permission. He figured he'd work for a few days, help with repairs, then decide what to do. That night, as he sat on the porch of the bunkhouse, the stars spread wide above him. He couldn't help but think about the girl with the shotgun. The next morning, he began fixing the fences, replacing broken boards and tightening the wire. From the house, he could feel her eyes watching him through the window. She never came out, not even to speak. But when he went to the barn, he noticed that someone had left fresh water for the horse. He said nothing, just worked quietly from sunrise to sunset. When evening came, he lit a small fire and cooked beans from his pack. The night air was cold, and he thought he heard the faint sound of a piano from the house, soft, lonely music drifting through the dark. As the days passed, David kept working. He cleared brush, repaired the gate, and mended the roof of the barn. Each morning he'd find small signs that she had been there before him. Feed for the animals, clean water, tools moved neatly to one side. She was still angry, still silent, but she hadn't chased him off again. Something was changing, slowly, like the land after rain. On the 5th day, as he was hammering a loose board, he heard a voice behind him. "You don't have to do all that," she said. He turned to see her standing near the fence, the shotgun gone. Her name was Lily Carver. Up close, she looked tired but strong, with eyes that had seen too much for her age. David nodded. "It needs fixing," he said simply. She crossed her arms. "You think that makes you the owner?" "No," he replied quietly. "I think it makes me responsible." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she turned and walked back toward the house without another word. That night, as David watched the light in the window of the house, he realized this wasn't just about land or money anymore. It was about two people, both stubborn and alone, each guarding what little they had left. The poker game had given him a ranch, yes, but it had also given him something he didn't understand yet. A reason to stay. The wind howled through the valley as he looked toward the horizon. Somewhere deep inside, he knew that his life had changed the moment he placed that final bet. What he didn't know yet was that the greatest gamble wasn't winning the ranch. It was earning the trust of the girl who refused to leave it. The next morning began with a calm sky and a pale sunrise spreading over the valley. The smell of dew and dust mixed in the air, and the ranch looked almost peaceful. David woke early, as he always did, and walked out of the bunkhouse with his sleeves rolled up. He could hear the faint sounds of chickens and the soft whinny of a horse from the barn. The place had life in it, though just barely. It needed care, and he was beginning to feel like maybe he could give it that. He grabbed a shovel and started cleaning the barn. Every movement filled the quiet morning. Dust rose from the floor, and sunlight slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls. He worked steady, not to prove anything, but because it felt right. From the corner of his eye, he noticed movement near the house. Lily stood there again, watching. She didn't shout this time, didn't wave him away, just watched for a moment before turning back inside. He didn't take it as a welcome, but it was something. By noon, he was working on the corral fence. He stopped when he saw a horse limping near the far side. Walking closer, he saw an old mare, thin and tired, one leg slightly swollen. He spoke softly to her, moving slow so she wouldn't spook. "Easy, girl," he said. The horse's ears twitched at his voice. When he reached for her, she didn't pull away. He checked her leg, ran his fingers along the joint, and saw she had stepped wrong on a nail or sharp stone. He fetched a rag, cleaned the wound, and wrapped it the best he could with a strip of cloth from his shirt. As he worked, he didn't notice Lily coming up behind him. Her voice startled him when she said, "That horse was my father's favorite." David turned to see her standing by the fence, her arms folded. She looked less angry now, more curious. "She's hurt," he said simply. "Just a sprain, I think. She'll be fine." Lily nodded, her eyes on the horse. "You know what you're doing." "A little," he replied. "Worked around ranches before." For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. Then Lily spoke again, her tone quieter. "You don't have to fix everything." "You're not staying." David looked at her, not with defiance, but with calm. Maybe not, he said. But while I'm here, I might as well do something useful. That seemed to confuse her. She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving him standing there with the horse and the warm afternoon wind brushing across his face. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, David sat on the porch of the bunkhouse eating beans from a tin. He heard footsteps on the dirt path. Lily came walking over, holding a small basket. I made bread, she said shortly. You can take some if you want. David looked up at her, surprised, and nodded. Thank you. She placed the basket near him but didn't sit. Don't think this means anything, she added. You're still on my land. He gave a small smile. Understood. She turned away, but for the first time since they met, there was no bitterness in her voice. That night, clouds gathered in the distance. A storm was coming. The air grew heavy, the smell of rain thick in the wind. David checked the barn doors and tied them shut. Lightning flashed far off, followed by the roll of thunder. When the first drops began to fall, he thought about heading inside. But then he saw the mare again, restless in her stall. He went to calm her, stroking her neck and whispering softly. The rain turned heavy, pounding the roof, and wind tore at the hinges. Suddenly, one of the barn doors burst open, slamming against the wall. David ran to pull it closed, but the wind was too strong. Water rushed in, and a frightened horse kicked at the gate. He grabbed a rope, fighting the storm, when he heard another voice behind him. You'll get yourself killed. It was Lily. She was drenched. Her hair stuck to her face, but she ran in and grabbed the other side of the door. Together, they pushed against the wind until they got it shut and tied. They stood there, soaked, breathing hard, both laughing a little from relief. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The storm roared outside, but inside the barn it felt oddly calm. Lily brushed wet hair from her face and said, You're a fool for coming out here. You too, David said with a small grin. She rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling back. Then she noticed the bandage on the mare's leg had come loose. Without a word, she knelt down and helped him wrap it again. Their hands brushed once and both froze for a heartbeat before pretending not to notice. When they finished, David said softly, You could have stayed in the house. And leave you to deal with this alone? She replied. He smiled faintly. Didn't think you cared that much. I don't, she said quickly, though her voice wasn't as sharp as before. I just didn't want you ruining the barn. He chuckled, and she gave him a look that was half annoyance, half amusement. The storm went on through the night, but the two of them stayed there, keeping the animals calm and checking the roof when the wind grew too loud. When morning came, the sky cleared and everything smelled fresh and clean. Puddles glimmered under the sunlight, and the hills looked brighter than before. Lily walked out of the barn, stretching her sore arms. David followed, wiping his hands on his shirt. For the first time, she didn't seem eager to tell him to leave. Thank you, she said quietly. He looked at her, surprised. For what? For helping, she said. Most men would have just left it to fall apart. David shook his head. I've had things fall apart before. Don't want to see it happen again. Lily nodded slowly. She seemed to be studying him in a new way, as if seeing someone she hadn't before. You're different, she said finally. Not like the men my father brought around. David looked toward the horizon where the hills rolled out into forever. Maybe that's because I don't want to own this place, he said. I just want to keep it alive. That day they worked side by side for the first time. Fixing a broken fence, clearing fallen branches, feeding the horses. They didn't talk much, but when they did, it felt easy. Simple, honest words between two people who didn't trust easily, but were beginning to understand each other. In the afternoon, when Lily brought out 2 mugs of coffee, she sat beside him on the fence rail. You know, she said, my father used to say this land would outlast us all. David nodded. Maybe he was right. As the sun went down, painting the sky in orange and red, Lily looked over at him and said, You could have sold the ranch already. I know people in town offered to buy it. David took a slow breath. I could have, he said, but it wouldn't feel right. This place isn't just dirt and fences. It's something someone cared for once. Maybe still does. She didn't answer, but her eyes softened. That night, David lay awake in the bunkhouse listening to the crickets. The storm had passed, but something else had settled in its place, something quieter, warmer. He thought about the way Lily had smiled in the barn, the way her voice had sounded when she said thank you. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a man just passing through. Out on the porch, Lily sat alone, staring at the stars. She didn't know what to think of the man who'd come into her life so suddenly. She'd hated him, resented him for taking what was hers, but now, she wasn't sure. He worked hard, asked for nothing, and carried himself with a kind of calm she couldn't quite understand. Maybe she thought he wasn't her enemy after all. Maybe fate had dealt her a strange hand, one that wasn't done playing out yet. And somewhere in the quiet of that night, as the ranch settled into peace, both of them realized that neither of them was as alone as they had been before. Days passed quietly after the storm. The land looked fresher and the air smelled cleaner. The Carver ranch began to breathe again, like an old horse learning to run after a long rest. David worked from sunrise to sunset, fixing things that had been broken for years. He mended the corral, cleared the weeds from the fields, and rebuilt the broken water trough near the barn. He never complained or spoke much while working, but everything he did carried patience and care. Lily noticed it, though she never said a word. In the mornings, she would sometimes leave breakfast by the fence, fresh biscuits or a jar of milk, but she always disappeared before he came close. He understood that small act for what it was, her way of saying she didn't hate him anymore. He respected that distance and never pushed. When he saw her watching from the porch, he would only tip his hat and keep working. Slowly, a quiet peace began to grow between them. One evening, while fixing the front gate, David heard a wagon coming down the dusty road. He looked up and saw two men from town, Tom Briggs, the storekeeper, and another rancher named Carter. They stopped near the gate, their faces serious. "Evening, Malone," Tom called out. "Heard you're still on the Carver place." David wiped his hands on his jeans and nodded. "That's right." Carter spat tobacco on the dirt. "Word is Hank's daughter still living here too?" David didn't answer right away. He didn't like the tone. "She's here," he said calmly. "What of it?" Carter gave a little laugh. "Just odd is all. You win the ranch in a game, she stays here, and you two pretend everything's fine. That ain't normal, friend." David's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. Tom looked at him more kindly. "Folks in town are talking, Malone. You might want to clear things up before someone makes trouble." Before David could answer, Lily's voice cut through the air. "That's enough." She was standing on the porch, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "This is my home, and he's not bothering me. If people in town have a problem, they can come say it to me." Carter snorted, muttered something under his breath, and drove off. Tom gave David an apologetic nod before following. When the dust settled, the ranch was quiet again. David turned to her. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she said. "They've been looking for gossip since the day my father lost that game." He nodded slowly. "I don't care what they say. I just don't want you caught up in it." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "I can handle myself." That night, neither of them spoke much. But something had changed. They had faced outsiders together, and that made the silence between them feel different. Less like distance, more like understanding. A few days later, the weather turned warm, and the ranch work grew heavier. David was in the field, digging out a new water ditch, when Lily came walking over with a pitcher of lemonade. "You'll burn yourself out if you keep working like that," she said. He looked up at her, sweat streaking his face, and smiled faintly. "Hard work never killed anyone." She handed him the cup anyway. "Drink before I pour it over your head." That made him laugh for the first time, a deep, honest laugh that surprised even her. She smiled back, and for a moment the world seemed lighter. As the days went by, they started talking more. Not about the past or the poker game, but about little things. About the land, about the horses, about life in town. Lily told him how her mother had passed when she was a child, and how her father had never been the same afterward. He grew bitter and drank too much, though she still loved him. David listened quietly, never judging, just letting her speak. When she asked about his past, he told her he'd worked all over. Mining camps, cattle drives, railroads, but never found a place worth staying. "Guess I was always moving too fast to notice," he said. "Maybe I finally ran out of road." One afternoon, while cleaning the barn, they found a box of Hank Carver's old papers, receipts, letters, and photographs. Lily sat on the floor going through them one by one.
"He used to dream big," she murmured.
"Said this land would make us rich one day." She held up a picture of her father standing with a young Lily beside a new horse. David saw the softness in her eyes, the sadness that came with remembering. He knelt beside her and said quietly, He left you something better than money. He left you this place. She looked around at the barn, at the walls her father had built, and nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. That evening, as the sun sank low, David went to check the fences one last time before dark. When he returned, he found Lily sitting on the porch, a small lantern beside her. "You've done more here in a few weeks than anyone's done in years," she said quietly. "I don't understand why." David leaned against a post thinking. "Maybe because it's worth it," he said simply. "The land. The work. You." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right, but before she could speak, a noise from the distance broke the moment. A horse was approaching fast. David stepped off the porch and saw a rider galloping toward them. It was Tom Briggs again, waving his hat. "David, trouble!" he shouted. When he reached them, he was out of breath. "It's Hank," he said. Lily froze. "What about my father?" Tom looked down. "He was found this morning. He didn't make it. Looks like he drank too much, fell from his horse on the road north of town." Lily didn't say a word. The world seemed to stop around her. David felt a chill run through him. She turned and walked slowly inside the house, her shoulders trembling but her head held high. David thanked Tom quietly and watched him right away. Inside, the house was silent. He found Lily sitting by the cold fireplace, staring at nothing. "I'm sorry," he said softly. She didn't look up. "He was stubborn," she whispered. "I kept waiting for him to change, to come back and tell me everything would be fine. Now I'll never hear it." David knelt beside her. "Sometimes people don't get a chance to make things right," he said. "But you can still remember the good parts." For a long time she didn't answer. Then she said quietly, "He hated losing this ranch. It broke him." David hesitated. "If it helps, I can sign it back to you. The deed, it's yours." She turned to him sharply. "No," she said. "You want it fair. My father made his choices. I just don't know what to do now." "You stay," David said gently. "You take care of the land. I'll help." Tears glimmered in her eyes, but she brushed them away quickly. "You'd really stay?" she asked softly. He nodded. "For as long as I'm welcome." For the first time, she didn't look like the proud, angry girl who guarded her home. She looked like someone who'd carried too much for too long. She nodded slowly and whispered, "Then I guess we both belong here now." That night, David sat on the porch alone, listening to the wind. The stars stretched endless above, and the sound of the crickets filled the quiet. Inside the house, a lamp still glowed faintly in the window. He thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought him here. The poker game, the angry girl, the storm, the loss. He hadn't expected to care about any of it. But now he couldn't imagine walking away. He took the deed from his pocket, looked at the faded ink, and smiled faintly. For the first time, the paper didn't feel like something he'd won. It felt like something he'd earned. Not just the land, but a chance at peace. In the stillness of that night, the ranch no longer felt like a stranger's prize. It felt like home. And though the wind whispered softly through the grass, he knew the days ahead would bring more than hard work and dust. They would bring something deeper. Something worth staying for. The days after Hank Carver's death were quiet and heavy. The ranch felt different now. Emptier but also calmer, as if the land itself had finally stopped holding its breath. Lily spent the first few mornings walking through the pastures alone, her eyes lost somewhere beyond the hills. David gave her space. He knew grief didn't like company. He worked from dawn to dusk, mending fences and tending to the cattle. But his mind stayed on her, wondering if she'd ever find peace again. One afternoon, as he was fixing the barn door, he noticed her standing by the corral. She looked pale but stronger somehow, like she had made a decision. He walked over slowly, wiping the dust from his hands. "You holding up all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her eyes were distant. "I've been thinking," she said, "about everything. About the ranch. About you." David didn't say anything, just waited. She continued, "My father was proud, maybe too proud. He wouldn't have wanted help from anyone. But I'm not him. I can't run this place alone. If you still mean what you said about staying..." Her voice trembled a little. David looked at her kindly. "I meant it," he said. "Every word." For the first time in days, she smiled. A small, tired smile, but real.
"Then we'll run it together," she said.
From that day on, they worked side by side. The days grew warmer, the sun harder on their backs, but neither complained. They fixed what was broken, shared simple meals, and built a rhythm that felt almost natural. In the mornings, David would start the fire, and Lily would bring coffee. They didn't talk much early in the day, but their silence was peaceful now, not cold. The townsfolk had stopped gossiping too. When David went into town for supplies, people greeted him with respect. Some still whispered behind his back, but most had come to see that he wasn't the kind of man who took advantage of anyone. He worked harder than anyone else and never bragged about it. One old rancher even said, "If Hank's girl trusts him, that's good enough for me." One afternoon, while they were repairing a broken wagon wheel near the barn, Lily looked up and said quietly, "You know, I used to hate you." David chuckled. "I guessed that." She smiled a little. "I thought you were just another drifter trying to take what wasn't yours. But I was wrong. You care more about this place than most people who were born here." David nodded, his hands steady on the wheel. "Maybe because I've never had a place to care about before." That made her pause. She watched him for a long moment, then said softly, "You do now." In the evenings, they often sat on the porch watching the sky fade from orange to purple. The land stretched quiet around them, peaceful except for the call of a lone coyote far away. Lily would hum an old tune her mother used to sing, and David would listen, feeling something warm settle inside him, a peace he hadn't known in years. Then one morning a letter arrived. It was from the county office, sealed and official. David opened it at the table, and his expression darkened slightly. Lily saw it and asked, "What's wrong?" He handed it to her. The paper said that Hank Carver had owed back taxes on the ranch 3 years' worth. The amount wasn't small. If they couldn't pay within a few months, the county would take the land. Lily's face went pale. "I didn't know," she whispered. "He never told me." David folded the paper carefully. "It's all right. We'll figure it out." But she shook her head. "We don't have that kind of money." He leaned back in his chair thinking. Selling cattle might help, but it wouldn't be enough. "There's always a way," he said finally. "We'll find it." Over the next few days, David worked even harder. He rode into town and found odd jobs, hauling lumber, fixing roofs, anything that paid a few coins. Lily sold some old equipment and stitched clothes for neighbors. They both came home every evening exhausted, but neither gave up. The people in town started to notice their effort. Tom Briggs, the storekeeper, even gave them extra supplies on credit. "You'll pay me back when you can," he said with a kind smile. One night after a long day, Lily sat by the fire with her hands folded in her lap. "You don't have to do all this," she said softly. "This isn't your burden." David looked at her across the flickering firelight. "Maybe not," he said. "But I'm part of this now. The ranch, it's all worth saving." She looked into his eyes for a long time and then whispered, "You're a good man, David." He smiled faintly. "I just do what feels right." A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A traveling cattle buyer stopped by the ranch, saying he'd heard they had fine stock. David showed him the herd, and the man offered a fair price for half of them. It wasn't everything they needed, but it was enough to cover most of the debt. David and Lily looked at each other, both relieved. "Looks like the ranch gets to live a little longer," he said with a smile. That night they celebrated with a simple dinner, fresh bread, beans, and the last of the apple preserves Lily had saved. The laughter came easy, and for the first time in months there was no shadow hanging over them. But just as life seemed to be finding its balance again, another letter arrived. This one was from a lawyer in town. Hank Carver had a brother, a man named Samuel Carver, who claimed he had a right to the land. He was coming to settle the matter in person. Lily's heart sank. "I didn't even know my father had a brother," she said. David frowned. "I've heard the name. He lives 2 towns over. Rich, mean, and the kind who doesn't like losing." A week later, Samuel arrived. He was tall, with a sharp suit and colder eyes. "So," he said, stepping off his horse, "you're the man who took my brother's ranch." David stood calmly. "I won it fair in a game he agreed to," Samuel sneered. "A game with a drunk is no agreement. That land belongs to my family." Lily came forward, her voice steady. "Then you should know your family gave up that right when my father lost it." David didn't steal anything. Samuel's gaze hardened. "You'll regret standing with him, girl." David's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He knew men like Samuel, bullies who thought money gave them power. Over the next few days, Samuel tried to push them out. He sent men to harass their cattle, tore down parts of the fence, and spread lies in town. But David didn't back down. He rebuilt every fence, fixed every gate, and kept working as if nothing had happened. Finally, Samuel came to the ranch again, furious. "You're wasting your time," he shouted. "I'll have the law on my side before the week's done." David stood in front of him, calm but firm. "You can bring whoever you want. The papers are legal, and the land's under both our names now." Samuel's face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this." He turned his horse and rode off. Lily let out a shaky breath. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she asked. David shook his head. "Not until he's got nothing left to fight with. But neither will we." That night they sat together under the stars. The air was cool and the ranch was quiet again. Lily leaned her head slightly toward him and whispered, "You really think we can win?" David looked out over the land, the fences they had rebuilt, the barn they had saved, the light still glowing in the house. "We already are," he said softly. The wind rustled the grass and she smiled. It wasn't over yet. There would be more battles ahead. But for now they had something stronger than fear. They had each other. And as the moon rose high above the ranch, the man who once wandered without a home and the woman who once refused to leave hers sat side by side, knowing that together they had built something neither of them ever expected to find: hope. The sun rose bright over the Carver ranch, painting the hills in gold. The storm of trouble that Samuel Carver had brought was still fresh in their minds, but the ranch stood strong, and so did the people who now called it home. David woke early, as always, and stepped outside to feel the morning air. It was cool and clean, the kind that made a man believe the day would be worth living. He looked over the land, saw the fences he'd repaired, the barn he'd mended, and the faint smoke rising from the kitchen chimney. It all felt different now, like it truly belonged to him and Lily both. Inside the house, Lily was making breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the room and sunlight spilled through the window, landing on the old wooden table where her father used to sit. For a moment she paused and looked at that empty chair, then smiled faintly. He'd have been proud of this, she whispered to herself. David walked in just then, wiping his hands on a towel. "Proud of what?" he asked gently. She turned and smiled. "The ranch, us. How far we've come." He nodded, pulling up a chair. "We've still got a ways to go," he said, but there was a warmth in his voice. "We've already gone farther than I thought we could," she replied. She set down a plate of biscuits and eggs, and they ate in quiet comfort, the kind that needed no words. Later that morning, they rode into town together for the first time. People watched as they passed, some curious, some friendly. For months, the town had talked about them, but now most of those whispers had turned into respect. Tom Briggs waved from his store porch. "Morning, folks," he said cheerfully. "Looks like the Carver Ranch is alive again." David smiled. "Still standing?" Tom chuckled. "More than standing. It's thriving. You two keep it up." They bought supplies, flour, nails, seed, and a few tools. While David loaded the wagon, Lily visited the small churchyard to place fresh flowers on her father's grave. She stood there quietly, her dress fluttering in the breeze, and spoke softly. "I was angry for so long," she said, looking down at the name carved in stone. "But I understand now. You made mistakes, but you loved this land. I'll take care of it, I promise." She wiped her eyes gently, then turned and walked back to the wagon where David waited. He didn't ask what she said. He just offered her his hand to help her climb aboard, and she took it. When they reached home, the air had turned warm again and the smell of summer grass filled the valley. They spent the afternoon planting seeds for the new season. The ground was rich, the earth soft from recent rain. They worked side by side, without much talk, just the easy rhythm of two people who understood each other without needing to say a thing. When the sun began to set, David looked over the field and said, "It's strange, isn't it? A few months ago, this place was falling apart. Now look at it." Lily brushed dirt from her hands. "Maybe it just needed the right kind of hands to fix it," she said quietly. As they walked back toward the house, they noticed a rider coming fast down the road. David tensed at first, thinking it might be more trouble, but as the man drew closer, he recognized him. It was the county officer from town. The man dismounted and handed David an envelope. "Got news for you," he said. David opened it, his eyes scanning the paper. Then his shoulders relaxed. "It's done," he said finally. "The taxes are cleared. The deeds in both our names, official and final." Lily's face lit up. "You mean it's ours now? Truly ours?" He nodded. "Every inch of it." For a moment she just stood there, the wind lifting her hair, her eyes shining with relief. Then she laughed, a sound full of joy, the kind of laughter the ranch hadn't heard in years. "We did it," she said. "We really did it." David smiled, a deep warmth spreading through his chest. "We sure did." That night the whole valley seemed alive. The air was filled with the sound of crickets, and the stars shone like silver dust across the dark sky. David sat on the porch, his boots resting on the step, watching the horizon. Lily came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him. For a while, they just listened to the quiet night. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly. "I used to," he said honestly. "Before I came here, I never stayed anywhere long. I didn't think I was meant to." "And now?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." She looked out over the land, the barn faintly glowing in the moonlight. "It feels alive again," she said, "like it's finally breathing after holding everything in for too long." He nodded. "You gave it that. You kept fighting when most would have given up." She glanced at him. "We both did." For a long time neither spoke. The night stretched around them, peaceful and wide. Then Lily said quietly, "You know, when you first showed up here, I thought you were just another man who wanted something for nothing." David chuckled. "And now?" "Now," she said, smiling, "I know you're the man who gave everything for a place that wasn't even his, and maybe that's what makes it yours." David looked at her then, and something unspoken passed between them, something deeper than words. Gratitude, respect, maybe even something more. But neither rushed to name it. The quiet was enough. A few weeks later, Samuel Carver came back one last time. This time he wasn't angry. He rode up slowly, his hat low over his eyes. "Heard the county settled it," he said. "You win, Malone." David stood by the gate, calm as ever. "Wasn't about winning," he said. Samuel looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe not for you. I'll be heading east. Don't plan on coming back." He tipped his hat to Lily. "Take care of yourself, niece." Then he rode off, leaving behind only the sound of hooves fading into the distance. When he was gone, Lily turned to David. "It's really over, isn't it?" "It's over," he said. "For good." The days that followed were calm and full. The ranch flourished, the horses grew strong, the fences stood straight, and the house glowed with new life. Lily started planting flowers near the porch, saying the ranch could use a bit of color. David built her a swing under the big oak tree, and she teased him about how crooked it was, though she sat on it every evening anyway. They worked, laughed, argued sometimes, and learned what it meant to share a life built from the ground up. One evening, as they sat watching the sun dip behind the hills, Lily said quietly, "Funny how everything started with a game of cards." David smiled. "Yeah, guess luck finally decided to be kind for once." She looked at him with a small grin. "Maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was meant to be." He laughed softly. "You believe in things like that?" "After all this?" she said. "How could I not?" The wind carried her words across the field, and David felt something inside him settle. He had spent so long running from place to place, never belonging anywhere, never trusting fate. But now, sitting beside Lily, watching the light fade over their land, he knew he'd found something rare. As the stars came out, Lily leaned back on the porch rail and said, "You know, people in town still talk about that poker game." David chuckled. "Let them talk." She smiled. "If only they knew you didn't just win a ranch that night." He turned to her. "What else did I win?" She met his eyes, her voice soft. A stubborn girl who refused to leave. David laughed quietly, then looked back at the land. Their land. Then, I guess, he said, I got the better end of the deal. The crickets sang louder as the night deepened. The ranch lights glowed softly, casting warm golden halos on the porch. And there, in the quiet heart of the valley, a man who once had nothing and a woman who once had lost everything sat together, watching the stars over the home they had saved. The Carver Ranch had seen hardship, loss, and change, but it had also seen something rarer. A story of second chances and quiet redemption. The fences might weather, the fields might fade with time, but the bond that grew there, between the drifter and the girl who refused to leave, would outlast them both. And as the first night breeze swept across the land, David felt the truth deep in his chest. He hadn't just won the ranch in a game of chance. He'd won a life, a purpose, and a place where his wandering finally ended. The game had given him more than he'd ever dared to dream. A home, a partner, and peace beneath an endless western sky.